Hello, everybody in the IOTSA community. Thank you very much for joining us again for the next implementation of our Secure Connections podcast. My name's Ryan Morris. I am your host and interviewer today, and I am joined today by David Corlette. He is the VP of Product Management for Vipre, and obviously somebody who knows the industry and the marketplace. So, David, thank you very much for joining us today and giving us some of the brain power that you've been gathering over all these years. Welcome to the conversation.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let me start with a little background then from your perspective. Help us understand how long have you been in the business of cybersecurity, and how did you get your start in this part of the industry?
Well, that's a great question. Started out as an IT administrator, basically, at a university lab. And my wife and I moved down to Washington, D.C., spent some time building sets in a scene shop. Just as I was looking for a job, ended up working for a software company, training, consulting, things like that. And then I moved over onto the product management side and started to build software products. So
Absolutely.
It's been a wild journey, a couple different companies, a lot of different acquisitions along the way, and here's where I am.
You see, and the one thing we've all learned in our career path, right? A generation ago, you start with a company, you stay with a company. These days, you might very well stay with the company forever, but you might carry 7 different business cards after a few years.
Yeah. Well, that's my story in a nutshell.
It's always good to see how we arrive at this point. You and I were talking just in the run up to our conversation here about how the topic of cybersecurity, right? I think the first time I had that conversation, I grew up in the sales and marketing world and then into the business leadership side of things. And as a young sales kid in the industry I think it was 1994, I went to a sales training with a group that brought in an OEM partner for us, and it was a certain well-known brand of endpoint software back in the 90s, and they were educating us about cybersecurity, and I thought, what a fascinating thing. And for about 25 years, nobody that I knew outside of the industry, like my mother and my friends, you said cybersecurity, and they looked at you like, are you speaking a foreign language? It's now dinner table conversation for everybody. How do you see that we got to this point? Like, what's your observation where, for all the tools and all the technology, how did we get to the point where even non-experts are aware of this stuff now?
Well, we carry computers in our pockets. You can't see it.
There we go.
We've taken technology, we've made it part of our everyday lives. We rely on it. Every time you get in a car or watch TV, it's a full-fledged computer behind the scenes there. The recent pipeline issue we had, you can't deliver the gas unless you have computers running that pipeline. So Absolutely. It permeates everything. And I think we've also now seen attackers being able to exploit that and take over some of those functions, and that affects people. Identity theft and all those things have really become part of the public consciousness.
And rightfully so. I think, again, awareness is a good first step. What's unfortunately also true is that for all of us who carry that computer in our product, by percentage, very few of us are actually trained security administrators. The average person with a phone in their pocket is a little bit more likely to click on a link than they ought to be, and a little bit less diligent about patch management and OS updates and things like that. I think that what's interesting, right? Cybersecurity was born as a business conversation. Your network and your enterprise of financial trading systems and whatever. It was very serious stuff, and we needed to make sure we were taking care of it. That's part of the conversation these days, sure, right? But there's so much more dynamic things happening in cybersecurity at the endpoint device. What makes me a little nervous, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, I think there's a lot of people in the industry who assume endpoint protection is the easy part, right? Like, oh, that's you just install some software and off you go. And they assume that we've solved that problem years ago and we don't need to focus there. I kind of don't think that's true. What do you think about endpoint protection in the modern world?
Well, I can point to a couple things, and look at any of the independent testing agencies like AV Comparatives. Clearly, there's dramatic differences between the tools that are available, and as it's a chicken and egg problem. The attackers figure out how to get around the best defenses this week, and you got to build more defenses next week. The way we look at it is it's a multi-layered system with technology and people all involved, and you can't just fix one part of it. There's all these interplays between the different parts of the system. So you can try to block all the things that look malicious in your email or on your endpoint, but that's never going to be 100% perfect. So you also need to train the user on how to detect potentially malicious things. And even so, they might be fooled into clicking on something that's very, very sophisticated, well-crafted. Then you need something to make sure that what they clicked on gets blocked in the end. So it's, in our minds, it's a very multi-layered system. We're trying to provide a portfolio of products that address different aspects of that, different ways that attackers can get in, and different techniques that they use. And the end goal is better security. But we have to have a partnership with the users that are trying to use the system to be productive, right?
Yeah, I remember back to my early days in the security space, and I remember being told that there were basically two postures that an organization could take. Right? There's open and there is closed. And open is you just open up all the ports and all of the network positions. You make sure everybody can go to everything, and hope for the best and try to protect and react effectively. The closed perspective was literally no one can connect to anything or anyone unless you ask for permission first. It seems like that second perspective is, well, not only not realistic in a human world, but it seems like that might be, just a massive amount of administrative work. And it might be more work than we have the bandwidth and the personnel to keep up with. As you're looking at it, like if a business owner, not technical professional, came to you today and said, all right, cybersecurity, where do I start?
Yeah.
Is there a starting point, or is it, like you said, the whole conversation altogether?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there are definitely some things we can point to. Most attacks start using email. And of course, there's many other ways to get them. I'm not downplaying the other vectors, but a good email security system, filtering your email before it arrives on your endpoint, always a good place to start. I'd say endpoint and user training are the second piece, so that once potentially malicious material arrives on the endpoint, it'll either be blocked by the endpoint solution or the end user will recognize it. Those probably the first, second, third, I'd say, to start in those areas. That'll resolve, or that will help address a big part of the problem. And the education in particular, if it's not an email, maybe it's an instant message, maybe it's a text message. If you've done the user education, then whatever creative way the attacker figures out to socially engineer your employees, hopefully they can still recognize it and address it.
See, I think that's the permanent X factor, right? No matter how secure your network is, no matter how proactive you are at sense and respond technologies, applying whatever machine learning you can to the system, as long as there are humans involved, there will be vulnerability. If you had to say those three factors that you started with, email and endpoint and education, ballpark it for me. Percentage of the SMB marketplace, what percentage do you think would get a passing grade on current security capabilities on those three levels?
Well, I think the good news is that we're seeing more of this kind of basic levels being built into the common technologies like Office 365, Google Mail. They have some basic filtering built in. So the overall base level security is going up overall, and most SMBs are going to be using those kinds of consumer grade or Soho grade technologies. And I do think the return on investment, if you will, of an attacker going after a 10-person company that does a few $100,000 in business every year, not that high, right? So they're going to be targeting the bigger companies. The bigger companies need to worry more, but we're seeing that kind of attack going down market as well. I would say well over 50% of small businesses, 50 seats or less, really have very little in the way of security other than what kind of comes built into the tools that they just happen to go with. I think that they probably do need something a little more. We're starting to see more and more of those attacks hitting companies that are pretty small. And it's ransomware for a few $1,000s. Maybe it doesn't kill their business, but still it's a big risk and not something that they want to be dealing with when they're just trying to run their business.
Absolutely. Especially, like you say, for those smaller organizations, if they're small enough that they don't have an IT department or a robust IT department, right? There's enough work to be done to design, deploy, and manage those systems, keep them actually functioning to run the business. The proactive side of cybersecurity, probably beyond those guys. I think you are onto it, right? For one of the points I always want to make sure our audience understands, for those of us who do this for a living and have for a while, we tend to think, well, the market's pretty saturated. We've been saying these things for years and years, and almost everybody is already solving their cybersecurity problem. If you are a managed service provider in our industry, I think it's vital that you take a big, deep breath and don't take this personally, but about 90% of all end user organizations need more professional help than they currently have. It's not like this is a 90% solved problem and there's one or two customers in your market that might need some help. I think we're still at that flip side of there's so few that we would legitimately say are rock solid protected. Almost everybody needs help. And that's kind of on us as an industry, that either we can approach them and find a way to engage them in that conversation, or that problem's not going to go away. I tend to be a little bit less optimistic about what the current state of cybersecurity is at the deployment level, because I see statistics out there that say things like 85% of all successful security penetrations come, like you said, email, and at the level of that would have been prevented with something as simple as patch management. Right. And to me, that, I look at that and I say, well, that's daunting, but it's also a humongous opportunity. So we ought to take that a little bit positively.
And as much as we love to sell to small and mid-sized businesses, and the products you provide are targeted at that market, my advice would be go sign up with a good quality MSSP. They've already done that research. They understand the market of products that are out there. Do you really think that as a 50-person organization, you're going to have the time to survey all the products in the industry and pick the right one? I think it makes so much sense to go with a managed provider that has done the research and can manage those tools for you. It might not be right for everybody, but I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, right? It's not like it's a static solution set. Even within what you guys bring to market every day, that the portfolio is expanding is reflective of the threats that we face. But even inside that portfolio, the things that you offer today are functionally very different from what they were 18 months ago. And I think that pace of evolution, the expansion and the evolution of the threats, I don't know too many end user organizations that have the bandwidth of humans to keep up with that stuff, right? I think that might be a very interesting takeaway for those people. If you had to pick like a device or an application that's a pet peeve of yours in terms of like security vulnerabilities, do you have one or two of them that you look at and just go, seriously, if we could just get rid of that, then we would all be better off?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have any that come to mind immediately, but to me, it's not so much about this application or that. There's poorly written applications out there. It's more about misconfiguration, right? It's more about you buy this solution and you don't have the expertise or the time to figure out how to configure it to be secure. And that goes for everything from your things like you sign up for WordPress and you set up a website for your business. WordPress is great software, but it has known flaws. And unless you're sitting there monitoring the lists, when they send out announcements about vulnerabilities and you throw in all these cool plugins, but unless you're monitoring to see, oh, wait, that plugin was identified to have a vulnerability, and you immediately take it out and replace it with something else, you're going to get compromised. So to me, I would lean away from bad mouthing certain products and just say, look, this is a huge challenge to understand the technology and to use it properly, configure it properly. And that's where you need the help. So we can help, MSPs can help. There's plenty of resources out there, but you have to proactively look for it as a business.
See, I think that's actually a very interesting evolution. It's not that we don't have products that can solve the problem. It's that we're not necessarily using those products correctly, right? I tend to liken it to the recent phenomenon of everybody watching HGTV and all these home remodeling shows, right? I don't know about you. I watch those kind of like I watch football on television. I really enjoy it, but you don't see me with shoulder pads on, right? I really enjoy watching home remodeling, but I've known just enough people who actually attempt that stuff that once they get into it and the studs are exposed and all the insulation is pouring out of the ceiling, and then they realize, oh, wow, this is a lot harder than it looks.
So I've been there, and I've been there, and I actually did that when I first moved to Washington, D.C. We bought a small townhome and renovated it, much of it ourselves.
Nice.
But when push came to shove and the big work had to be done, we hired somebody to do it.
See,
because I said I will never install plumbing, because if a pipe bursts and the whole house gets washed away, it can't be my fault.
Exactly, right? There's like, I can swing a hammer and hit a nail. I'm fine on that, right? Plumbing and electrical, these are things that have lasting consequences. You might want to hire a professional. I think that applies directly to our industry. More than enough tools, more than enough technology to solve the problem. But like you said, configuration, just because somebody has a firewall in their data center does not mean that thing was set up correctly. And that's a good buzzword for those of us that do this for a living, and the folks listening to this podcast, job opportunities for security professionals.
Well, and I'll tell you just my personal experience. When we redesigned our endpoint product for the cloud, we spent hours upon hours upon hours making sure that the configuration settings were laid out and the right defaults were in place and they were foolproof and explained in the UI, so you didn't have to go look it up in a manual. It takes lots and lots of effort to design a product in a way that makes it easy to use and easy to configure in a way that isn't going to break something. And knowing the amount of effort that goes into just that one product, thinking about all the other vendors that are just trying to get features out the door as fast as they can, it's a huge challenge. And you can't expect non-professionals to get it right every time. And even the professionals don't get it right most of the time. So it's just, to me, it's a scenario where you need all the help you can get. And yes, it might cost something to go hire somebody to help you, but that investment is probably much more effective than you spending the time to learn it yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, to learn it today, if you can go from 0 to 60 and you become certified in security today, you did not just solve a problem, you signed up for a new job description, because things will continue to evolve and to progress, and you got to stay up with those things, right? I heard from an engineer friend years ago when he was coming out of school, and it has stuck with me forever. And I think that there's actually been books written about this concept. The concept of successful engineering is not about adding one more function. It's about taking away one more unnecessary thing. And that the most sophisticated engineering appears to be the most simple output to address the challenge. I've personally, right, I've been trained on all of these things over the years, from a seller's point of view, from a product point of view. I've seen these things, and to this day, there are still some interfaces that when you fire this system up and you look at the interface, even with somebody like me who's been doing this for 25 years, I might stare at the screen for about 10 minutes and go, where do you begin? What, like you said, just enough that if you tweak this and you might break something important. And if the interface looks overwhelming, my guess is that's not very gracefully engineered software. I think simplicity is your friend, especially when you're dealing like an MSP audience. If you have 50 or 100 or 150 different customers who might each have different profiles, different configurations, different exposures and threats, if configuration is hard, you're probably not going to keep up with it. And if the sense and respond function in a threat is difficult to diagnose, humans are pretty predictable. We might just avoid that stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the difference between all-encompassing powerful software versus the manageability and the execution speed in doing cybersecurity as a function.
Yeah, it's a good topic. Our engineering aesthetic is very much about exposing what must be exposed, and then anything that the customer would have to decide about how to configure it, but they could easily make a poor choice. If we can find a way to automate our way around that, or make the choice for them by looking at other aspects of the system, even if that's complicated, we try to make that choice. And the reason is we've seen this kind of misconfiguration again and again and again. And things that look simple in a user interface are actually often very complicated behind the scenes, because in order to synthesize all the information you need to make the right choice on behalf of the user, that is actually really the tricky part. So if you can prompt the user for something clear, logical, simple, yes or no, do this, there may be hours and hours and hours of coding that went into making that choice and presenting the two options to the user in just the right way. So it's kind of a design aesthetic that needs to go in from very early in the process. And because, like, I'll use an example of our endpoint solution again, because it's very illustrative. We took our server solution, our on-premise solution that had been in the market for 15 years and had features added bit by bit over time. We converted it to cloud. And a big part of the argument is, what can we take away and automate behind the scenes, just leaving the stuff that we really have to get the customer's opinion about what's the correct setting for their environment. And that was as big a discussion as, how can we set up these configuration options in what order and things like that? What can we actually take away? And I think by doing that, we created a product that was a lot easier to use, a lot more intuitive, and more secure.
See, and that's the thing, right? Because if this was just a question of buy the most capable product, configure it one time, and then set it and forget it, cool, that would be a good approach. But that's not the world we live in especially in a cybersecurity world. It's constantly progressing and evolving. There's thousands of new exploits daily that we have to be aware of, and new techniques and new vulnerabilities to exploit the humans that aren't necessarily paying attention, right? Things constantly move. I think that as an industry, the more we can simplify the user expression of this, the more likely it is they'll actually participate. And that's true at the administrator level as well. If you give me 80 things to click and configure, I won't. And I think that the more advanced our systems are, the more complicated they are to run, the less likely they're going to get used well, even by an MSP. If it's graceful, if it looks elegant, if it looks simple, all that rocket science that went into the simplification, that's our friend as professionals, right? That we need to be the ones who find it easy, so we'll actually use this stuff. What is your advice if I'm a managed service provider, if I'm trying to make these kinds of services consumable by my install base, right? It's less, in my mind, about what the functionality is, and it's more about how do we just get people to agree to let us do this work on their behalf. Whether it's on the system side or on the messaging side, how do you recommend that a managed service provider can actually get this conversation front and center and get our customers to go with us?
Yeah, I would say that the conversation needs to start around operating your business efficiently, right? And if you talk to most companies, yeah, there are companies that are in the IT space, and so they're happy to do a lot of this on their own. But you talk to somebody who is an architect or a developer, or they love selling soap. They're not in business to run an IT department. They're in business to do what they love. They're in the business to, make money and participate in the activity they love or sell the product that they created, and they have this brilliant idea. So to them, security is a distraction. Their accounting department is probably a distraction. Their legal department is a distraction if they have a legal department. And so by talking first about here's how we can help your business operate securely without distracting you, so you don't have to deal with the fact that your employee clicked on something and now you have to rebuild their laptop. We'll take care of that for you. We'll take it off your plate. And think of it like insurance, right? You pay insurance so that if a meteor hits your shop and blows up, you can get it replaced. Same thing here. We're ensuring that if there's a security incident, there's someone there to take care of you and get you back up and back in business as soon as possible. I think if you focus, my personal opinion, right? But if you focus on how it improves the efficiency of the business and how you can take away that layer of worry that they don't want to be thinking about, that's probably a good starting point. And then, there's ways in which the end user will still need to interact with the security products that you're planning to roll out into the environment, but trying to keep that clear and logical and training them on how to react when they see certain things happen. Maybe a threat warning pops up in the UI. Well, what do you do about it? Do you report it to admin? I think there's a lot of user education aspect for all the employees within a business you're trying to sell to. That's really important so that they understand what to expect and what to do if they see something suspicious. Yes, as an MSP, you're providing that service, you're trying to take care of their security, but they're still the boots on the ground. They're still the ones that are intimately affected by a potential attack or compromise or phishing email or what have you. And so they need to understand how to react to that and alert you as the MSP so that you can be successful. So I would call out those two things. Number one, just focus on making the business more efficient. And number two, recruit the employees within that company to be your first line of defense.
See, I 100% agree with both of your points. Your first point makes a really interesting distinction, I think, in terms of the way that business owners and executives think about the various services that they outsource, the things that they pay to get value, right? If you think about what's core and not core to your operation, as you've described, legal and financial and human resources, those are the most common things that get outsourced by a business. And IT is coming along in that direction. What's different about those services versus technology? Nobody shops for a corporate attorney based on price or discount. Nobody is looking for a CPA who will give them the lowest monthly expenditure. That still seems to be the way that most MSPs are presenting their services. We're less expensive than somebody else, or we're less expensive than if you do that. Nobody is saying, your corporate counsel, I'm the cheapest lawyer in town. That's why you should hire me. And yet we still see an awful lot of very sophisticated cybersecurity services sold that way. I think that might be a question of maturity, but I think it might be a question of the internal confidence factor for those of us who do this for a living, that we might need to kind of step up our confidence game and say, hey, I'm just as mission critical as that lawyer and that CPA.
Yeah, but it might be harder to quantify the operational efficiency gains you get by not worrying about, so I understand that there's that, what numbers do I have to pull upon? Well, it's the price, right? But if you can come up with a way to look at case studies from your other customers and say, they used to spend this much on IT and they had these set of incidents and they spent this many hours responding and this overall cost them X. And then we came in and here's what it's been since then. And look, A is bigger than B. So you should go with us. Like, I think that's where we need to get to. Sell the value, sell the return on the investment of bringing in a managed provider. That's not easy to do, not saying that's a simple task, but I think that's what you need to get to in order to use that as your value proposition.
Yeah. See, and that is of all the trends and dynamics in the past, in the past 5 years that have really taken root and accelerated through the pandemic and all of the business and social disruption that we've been through. There are some things that were already true that went away because we just didn't need them anymore. There are some things that were true and have been exaggerated. You just hit what I think is the kind of central message of the last 2 years. If you sell the thing, people are going to argue with you on price. If you sell the value and the outcome of that capability, now even non-technical business professionals are able to measure it and to understand why they would pay for it. Selling the value of cybersecurity, I think over the years, we've seen kind of the generations, right? There was that first generation of the boogeyman is coming for you, and fear was the thing. And then we maybe evolved to look at all the complexity and you'll never keep up with it and you need a professional. Business value is a different conversation than fear. And I think that might need to be something our audience, anybody who is within the sound of our voice right now, might be their most challenging evolution in their business. I think they can learn the new technology in a snap. I think that, the professionals in cybersecurity, it's not like we don't understand how to solve these problems. We just maybe don't understand how to communicate them to our customers and get them to pay us for those things.
Well, and think about it this way, right? Maybe the first thing you hear is, well, I've never had anybody get a phishing email. I've never gotten my computer compromised. So why would I pay for this, right? But the same person happily pays for car insurance when they've never been in an accident, right? So it's the same kind of discussion. You're insuring against the future cost, the future risk. But to do that, there's a certain amount of realistic fear that you have to talk about with your customers, because it does happen. And at this point, if you haven't been living under a rock, you probably have a peer that was running a company that got compromised. I mean, there's enough models in the papers that it should be a conversation you can have with a business you're trying to sell to, and they'll understand, okay, yes, this is a risk. Maybe it might be hard to quantify what that risk is, but they should be aware of it.
Yeah. And see that again, back to our original observation, this is now dinner time conversation for non-professionals, right? Yeah, those that, you've tried to explain for years to your friends what it is that you do for a living. And they're like, wait, what? Let's talk about sports. Because
don't think there's a risk. Were you able to buy gas a couple weeks ago? I mean,
exactly. That's now mainstream conversation. Everybody is aware of cybersecurity, and that should make this a more urgent opportunity. I think it's one of those natural alignments of interest, right? Yeah. Where what's good for the customer and what's good for the service provider happen to be exactly the same thing. Outsourced, long-term, real-time contract services that can deal with an evolving real-time threat.
Yeah,
that sounds like a good solution for the customer. It also sounds like a phenomenal business model for the service provider. So hopefully that means we'll get a whole lot of adoption. As we draw to the close of our time here, it's amazing how fast time flies when we're geeking out on security technology, right? Which we know that makes us interesting cats in the real world, right? If you're looking forward, if you had to make a prediction or a recommendation of where you think that our industry is headed, or a threat maybe that people aren't aware of, what's the advice if you had one opportunity to tell somebody this is what you need to be paying attention to? Where do you put your focus these days?
So, well, to me, it's actually the fundamentals, and by that I mean it's the user education component and the I'll describe it as, so we sell a product it's called phishing protection, which is not the relevant piece, but it does an analysis on when a user clicks on a link and they're trying to go to a website that we don't know yet if it's trusted or not. It does a real-time analysis of the page they're seeing and what the content is, if there's a malicious code or it appears to be a phishing website. It's that interaction between the user and the outside world, the internet, the web, so to speak. That, I think, is where the biggest risk is. Most ransomware attacks start with clicking on a link in an email, right? And so if we can disrupt that chain at that point, either by blocking the email in the first place with a quality email security solution, or after they click on the link, in real time analyzing where they're trying to go. It doesn't have to be a full cloud hosted, browser isolation solution, but that first click is going to be that touch point where you really need to be checking to make sure they're not going somewhere that is either known to be malicious, or by using some machine learning, you can figure out, oh, that doesn't look kosher. I think that's the biggest area of risk. And if we could disrupt just that part of the kill chain, I think that would go a long way to improving our security.
Absolutely. I think fundamentals are the important point, but the human is the focus, right? I think that where I hear you going, and I find that we can really start to engage customers in an optimistic way, is we should not be in the business of telling our customers, you are not allowed to use the web or your network or et cetera, right? We shouldn't be in the world of technology prevention. We should be in the business of business enablement. We want you and all of your users, sophisticated or not, we want them all to be able to do their jobs confidently and click on what they need to click on. I heard recently somebody said that their awareness campaign to all of their users, and I was impressed that they were having an awareness campaign, but the basic message was never click on anything. And I thought, oh no, I think we've gone really far in the wrong direction, because that sounds defensive, and it sounds fear-based, and it also sounds limiting for our customers.
Yeah, that slows down your business. I mean, someone sends you, hey, I need you to fill in this document. Here's a link. You have to be able to evaluate if that link is likely to be secure based on the context clues. That's where security awareness training comes in. I think every managed provider listening to our call today should start selling security awareness training to the customers, whether they provide it themselves or they engage with a third party like Vipre. Doesn't matter. I think you should be teaching your clients, their employees, how to be safe. And if you can do that, your cost to respond to incidents is going to go down, because they're not going to have as many incidents, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, my one word of advice.
Well. Exactly. Let's train the humans, and then we'll deal with all the hard stuff behind the scenes. But I do think that this is, for all of that expansion and multiplication and all the hundreds of % of increase of security incidents and ransomware signatures and whatever, we still need to be able to communicate a confident optimism that says, that's why you work with us, because we can solve that for you, not, oh no, the sky is falling, go back into your bunker and never ever click on a link. I think it's a slightly different marketing message that our industry needs to embrace there. But I think it's great that there are tools that solve these problems. I think it's great that there are places where we can get started. If our audience is interested in learning more about Vipre, learning more about security awareness training, where would they start? Where would you direct them for gathering additional information and getting started in a conversation with you guys?
Well, a great place to start would be our website, www.vipre.com. It's Vipre. It's an acronym. Nobody knows this, but it is. Well, you can right here on my shirt.
Excellent.
But yeah, it's our website's a good place to start. There's information there about our security awareness training and our other products. And if you want to reach out to me, David Corlette at Vipre.com. Very easy. But I want to say, Ryan, thank you very much for having me here today and having this opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing the experience. I think that it's the voice of that practical application of sophisticated technologies that our industry really benefits from. So we appreciate you taking some time out and sharing your years of experience with us. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.